Hello, welcome to Eye on Africa here on France 24 with me, Yinko Yetade. Here are the top stories. Pope Leo the Fourteenth wraps up day one of a historic visit to Algeria. The trip carrying personal weight for the pontiff as he honours St. Augustine, an African saint. We'll break down the significance of the trip with Catherine Conibert, who is the author of St. Augustine, the African. Dozens killed in airstrikes that hit a market in the village of Jilli, located along the border between Borno and Yobe states in Nigeria. Civilians caught up in the crossfire as Nigerian authorities battle against the growing jihadist insurgency. And French lawmakers debate a new bill that could make it easier to return artworks looted during its colonial era. It comes as restitution demands get louder, with African governments pushing hard to bring their cultural heritage back home. Welcome to the programme. Pope Leo the Fourteenth has wrapped up the first day of a historic visit to Algeria. Day one saw the pontiff make a stop at the Great Mosque of Algiers before visiting the Basilica of Our Lady of Africa. While his trip is focused on religious coexistence in a country that is overwhelmingly Muslim, with fewer than 10,000 Catholics in a population of around 48 million. Algeria marks the first stop in a wider African tour that will also take him to Cameroon, Angola and Equatorial Guinea. Well, let's bring in Solange Moujan because she takes a look at the trip now.
A first ever papal visit to Algeria, one with the goal of building bridges between Christians and Muslims. After being greeted at the airport and then meeting with the president of Algeria, the Pope spoke before a monument to those who lost their lives in the struggle for independence from colonial France. There, the pontiff focused on forgiveness.
The true struggle for liberation will be definitely won only when peace in our hearts has finally been achieved. I know how difficult it is to forgive. However, as conflicts continue to multiply throughout the world, we cannot add resentment upon resentment, generation after generation. In this place.
Following his two-day visit of Algeria, Pope Leo will visit 3 other African nations: Cameroon, Angola, and Equatorial Guinea, all part of his 11-day tour of Africa. And this first stop is particularly significant for the Pope, as Algeria was the home of St. Augustine, founder of the order of service and communal living that Pope Leo adheres to. In his first speech as the pontiff, he referred to himself as a son of Augustine.
Well, as we've been mentioning, the visit carries personal significance for the Pope, as Algeria is the home of St. Augustine. The pontiff himself is the first from the Augustinian order. Well, let's talk more on this and bring in Catherine Conibert, who is a Leslie Clark professor at Bryn Mawr College, and she's also the author of Augustine, the African. Catherine, thank you so much for joining us on the programme. It's really great to have you. First of all, I'd love for you to just break down what it means for a pope to be from the Augustinian order.
Certainly, it's a remarkable development. There has, as you've said, never been a pope from the Augustinian order, probably because Martin Luther, the great Protestant reformer, came from that order. It's a very small order, and the pope is deeply Augustinian in his way of thought and speech. It's incredibly important.
Well, let's go back on the history of all of this. Of course, St. Augustine was born in Algeria, but spent much of his life elsewhere. Talk to us about why his connection to North Africa is so important.
If I may, Yinka, I will correct you. He actually spent most of his life in Algeria. Just 5 years in Italy and a little while in what is now Tunisia. So he is incredibly important to North Africa, to Africa more broadly, and to Algerians specifically. When I visited Algeria, he was described to me as a uniting figure because he is a brilliant pre-Islamic figure. He's a founding figure in Christian theology, arguably the most important figure in Western Christian theology. And so that he made, as I say, more or less his entire life in Algeria is extraordinarily important.
And in your view, why do you think the Pope has chosen to honor the legacy of St. Augustine now? What message do you think he's trying to send to the church and the wider world?
Well, I think, as you already mentioned, he is profoundly committed to the thought of St. Augustine. He described himself as a son of Augustine. Augustine, like the Pope, emphasized peace and love and dialogue. And so that he, the Pope, echoes all that at this moment is incredibly important. I think it's also particularly important that the Pope is now in Africa, in the home of St. Augustine, because the Pope seems committed to tipping our focus towards the global South. And this is his own profound connection with Africa.
Of course, Algeria is a country that is majority Muslim, a very small Catholic community, and the Pope is very much focused on trying to encourage interfaith dialogue. What do you feel the Pope's visit to Algeria signals, both to that small Catholic Christian minority, but also to the Muslim majority in the country?
I think for the small Catholic minority, it's incredibly important. I'm sure they feel seen in ways that they normally are not. On the one hand, they have a deep inheritance. The tradition of Christianity in Africa runs back very early. There were prominent thinkers in the 2nd century, but of course it is discontinuous. And as you mentioned, it is now vastly a Muslim country. For the Muslims, I hope that the fact that the Pope has been so bold in his promotion of peace, in his opposition to violence and war, he's been so outspoken about that. I hope that that is encouraging to them and resonates with them.
Catherine, it was great to get you on the programme. Thank you so much for breaking down the visit for us and the significance of the visit as he honours St. Augustine. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you very much, Yinka.
Well, let's move on and turn to Nigeria, where at least 56 people have been killed in airstrikes fired by the military. The army says the attacks, which hit a market in the village of Jilli, located along the border between Borno and Yobe states, were targeting jihadists. Following the strikes, the military said scores of terrorists were killed, but did not mention any civilian casualties. It's the latest flashpoint in Nigeria's long battle against jihadist insurgency. It's triggered the emergence of powerful splinter groups, including Islamic State West Africa Province. Our Lagos correspondent, Sam Olukoya, tells us more.
The airstrikes at the Jilli market in Yobe State over the weekend happened during active trading hours, with many traders and buyers present at the time. Eyewitnesses spoke of a scene of horror with dead bodies and badly injured people everywhere. The military earlier said 3 successful airstrikes were carried out in the area, insisting that those targeted were terrorists who are members of the Islamic State West African Province. But now, the military has shifted its position a bit, saying it intends to investigate civilian casualties. This might be a prelude to accepting that the wrong target was struck. It will, however, be hard to explain how people buying and selling in a crowded market were mistaken for terrorists. The military has a history of hitting the wrong target in its fight against jihadists and other armed groups in northern Nigeria. Hundreds of people have been killed in recent years by airstrikes that struck the wrong targets. Civilians continue to pay the huge price of deadly airstrikes, hitting them mistakenly.
After much delay, France is finally taking a big step. Lawmakers have started debating a new bill that could make it easier to return artworks looted during the country's colonial era. There are tens of thousands of artifacts sitting in French national collections, many of them claimed by countries like Algeria, Mali and Benin. Now restitution demands are getting louder, with African governments pushing hard to bring their cultural heritage back home. Charlie James looks at the bill and the countries trying to get their items back to them.
Looted by the French more than a century ago, this sacred talking drum returned to Ivory Coast in March. Previously on display in a Paris museum, the drum was the first such looted artifact to return there from France. But Ivory Coast has asked for the restitution of 147 others.
On a national level in Ivory Coast, this actually represents the national cause. It will certainly foster or even strengthen the very identity of the Ivorian people.
Back in 2017, newly elected French President Emmanuel Macron made a political promise to return artifacts taken by his nation during its colonial era.
I cannot accept that a large share of the cultural heritage of several African countries is in France. There are historical explanations for this, but there is no valid, lasting and unconditional justification.
France possesses thousands of these artifacts and has been flooded with requests from Algeria, Mali, and Benin. Monday, French lawmakers are debating a bill to simplify the return process. Current law requires every looted item in the national collection to be voted on individually. But the bill has faced political wrangling. The far left wants its scope extended. The far right wants to limit restitution only to states that have so-called cordial relations with France. There is precedent for this type of law. In 2023, France adopted 2 laws to return objects looted from Jewish families during World War II and human remains from public collections.
Next, it's unprecedented. In the Democratic Republic of Congo, the government has announced that for the first time in history, it's raised money on international capital markets. Kinshasa says it managed to raise $1.25 billion. The government is celebrating the step, saying it shows confidence in the country's economic situation. Our correspondent Emmett Livingstone has more now from Kinshasa.
This is a significant milestone for the Democratic Republic of Congo. The country is affected by conflict, by poverty and by corruption, but for the very first time, it successfully raised money on international capital markets. Last week, the Congolese government raised $1.25 billion through a sale of eurobonds. The government said that this showed that markets were confident in the country's economic outlook. Congolese Finance Minister Doudou Fwamba said on Monday that this was a huge step forward for the impoverished country.
Même nos conseillers n'arrivaient pas à réaliser que la République démocratique du Congo, ce pays qui est décrit comme simplement celui où il y a la guerre à l'Est, peut être en mesure d'attirer autant d'investisseurs. Pour ceux qui n'étaient pas dans cette salle, il y avait de l'émotion pour tous ces jeunes Congolais qui étaient là pour dire « Nous avons fait notre part à l'histoire de faire sa part. Nous avons mis notre pays sur la trajectoire du développement. Et le reste ne nous concerne pas. Nous avons créé un précédent pour que ces pays ne soient plus les mêmes. »
Congo has promised to spend the money on upgrading infrastructure. Its sale of eurobonds has come despite an ongoing conflict with M23 rebels in eastern Congo. But Congo remains a mining powerhouse. It's the world's largest producer of cobalt, for example, and last year it signed an economic deal with the US over access to minerals.
And finally, Ethiopia's Shure Demisi delivered a standout performance at the Paris Marathon, smashing the women's race record with a personal best of 2 hours, 18 minutes and 34 seconds. She cut more than a minute off the previous record set in 2022 by Kenya's Judith Jeptum. Demisi led a dominant race through the French capital, crossing the finish line on Avenue Foch ahead of fellow Ethiopian Misgani Ali Mehu and Kenya's Mandolin Maisai. Stay with us here on France 24. Plenty more news to come.
Thanks very much for staying with us. Time now for Eye on Africa with me, Georgia Calvin-Smith.
All the latest in politics, economics and the arts in Africa on France 24. Our journalists are in every region, every country, to report on the emergence of a continent of unparalleled riches. Bringing you Africa's stories on France 24.
Thanks for joining us. Do so again. Take care.
Liberté, égalité, actualité.